Okay, I'm back here again with Trevor Evans. Don't know what I'm going to talk about. Probably something along the lines of the fact that we never got back round to the Foreign Relations Bill that I thought was signed to favour the Australians. Apparently it wasn't. But then I want to cross over to a couple other subjects like the ASIO Bill 2020, where, from my understanding of the presentation that I've seen, even though it might be on, it wasn't on YouTube, it was on BitChute, which is what they call a dark website, perhaps. Maybe because there's no censorship. But YouTube and Facebook try to condemn it for something that it's not. Now, the presentation I saw that this ASIO amendment bill is allowing, apart from a lot of other stuff that I was not very happy about, the one that really pissed me off was they're going to introduce what they call a questioning warrant. Do you have any idea what that is?
Tell me what it is.
Well, apparently it's a warrant where they don't have to have any proof of anything. They can just come along without arresting you, detain you for 28 days without arrest.
Okay, and what are the requirements for using one of those? Because presumably it's not just open slather. Presumably there's a whole lot of checks that will need to be satisfied first.
No, because it's ASIO. And what's more, on top of it, they're talking about issuing them orally, which takes away the chain of responsibility to why they get issued. You know, someone can say, no, I didn't say that, straight away. What do they call it? Plausible deniability. So to me, there's no accountability. That's between that and the Foreign Relations Bill, where they've legislated to allow foreign troops on our shore in an emergency, right? Now, politicians can call lots of things they call the pandemic an emergency, which hasn't even killed 2% of the global population. Hasn't even killed 0.2% of the global population, right? So that's not an emergency. 5% of the global population, and if I saw 1 in 20 people dropping on the street, I would go, well, fuck, I'm going to wear a mask. But 0.2%, where they lock down states for a dozen cases, where they're locking down Victoria mainly. Queensland, they got a knee-jerk reaction at times. And then let's go across to Scott Morrison, who I've seen articles where he's contemplating a vaccine passport of sorts. Now, between those three, shall we say, legislations or ideas or whatever's going to get balls getting kicked around, that sounds really fucking communist to me, because that has the potential to be very draconian.
Where should we start? Maybe let's start with the last one first. So, I guess firstly, the PM has made it very clear that we're not interested in the way that you've described a vaccine passport there, which is some requirement for all Aussies to have some piece of paperwork. The conversation that Scott Morrison had with some journalists at the time, which some unkind people on social media then tried to twist, was to address your second concern, which was around state lockdowns. And the Prime Minister was trying to say, and in fact I would say that he did say pretty clearly, it would be good if there was some mechanism for citizens to be exempt from those sorts of state lockdowns and so on, if they can prove that they've done the responsible thing. And so the idea of that is not to force Australians to have a piece of paperwork or not, but actually to allow them to take responsibility and to escape some of the restrictions like lockdowns.
All right, well then you're talking about that the onus goes back onto the citizen to prove they're doing the right thing.
Well, there's rights and there's responsibilities, right? So I guess the point is, in a world at the moment where we are, which you're saying that you are not in favour of some of the heavy-handed responses that have been implemented by state governments. The Prime Minister, by doing that, is trying to find a way for citizens to be able to get around those restrictions, where they're able to.
Why don't you just grow a pair of balls and point out in the Constitution and read it out to the Australian public and say, it says here in the Constitution that you have the right to roam this country freely, and that would undermine the state governments just like that. and it would give everyone a little bit more incentive to perhaps go back and read the Constitution, because in schools they're not teaching kids what money is about. They're teaching them how to get a job and be smart enough to get a job but dumb enough not to understand money, and they're teaching them how to feel. What they should be teaching them is the concept of money and teaching them the Constitution. Those two issues should go back into the education system.
Well, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I am, pretty sure that people's freedoms are not completely open slather, and that there are some responsibilities and things which are considered reasonable. For instance, human beings' inherent right to be free does not stop them from being arrested and put into jail if they've murdered somebody, for instance. So there are outcomes like that are reasonable, even in light of our constitutional freedoms. I'm happy for any person to go and challenge any particular laws or restrictions on the basis of them being constitutional. But what I would say is, the last year has been a bit of a shock, a bit of an awakening for many Aussies to realise that, to be reminded again that we've got different levels of government and they are sovereign governments in their own right, and that the federal government is not on top under our constitution. The states are, and their laws are plenary and often supreme.
Well, in my checkered history, as a lot of people would look at me and think I'm a bad person, obviously, but I have had a checkered history, and I have met I've met a lot of good cops, but I've met some real arseholes, like, to be expressionist, Australian expressionism.
Sure.
I've met some real arseholes where they would literally put bogus charges on you, and because I don't have the finances to defend myself, most of the time people go to court, they go, it's easier for me just to plead guilty, pay the fine and keep walking. Well, then there's a really bad, shit stain on your fucking record for the rest of your life, because some copper or anyone just points the finger and says, this is what I'm getting at when it comes to that ASIO Act 2020. And there's a lot of parts in it that I didn't like when I watched this presentation on BitChute. And this particular guy's got YouTube channels as well, but he didn't post it on there because it probably would have got taken down. And I did post that particular link to a number of sites, and it did get taken down, right, from one of the sites, because Facebook said it goes against their standards. Who the fuck is Facebook to tell me that I can't put up a video presentation about the Australian government regulations and the bills they're about to vote on? So to me, big corporations like the social media like YouTube and Facebook censorship needs to be fucking well addressed as well.
Yeah, well, you'll be aware that some of the recent reforms and proposals that the federal government of Australia has been putting out have not made us the favourites of some of the social media and internet giants, because we're looking at how they can more responsibly do some of the things that they're doing and providing some of the services they are to Australians. They're very pause there for a moment, Ross, while I go on.
Alright. Where were we?
I think you're telling me about your concerns with ASIO laws around compelling evidence.
Yeah, I've met a lot of coppers that I just would point the finger, and that questioning warrant, like that comes down to very draconianly someone points a finger. Now, I don't agree with the Australian legal system. Like, the American legal system is you're innocent until the government proves you guilty or someone proves you guilty. Here, you've got to prove your innocence. Now, to me, the legal system should be, okay, I do something to you, you point the finger at me, we go to court. Now, if I prove that I'm innocent, you should be up for all my costs, because you're the one that pointed the finger in the first place.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work out that way, does it?
Well, actually it does most of the time in almost all the circumstances, but there's often exceptions and exemptions to the ordinary way of doing things. So there are actually lots of examples in laws where the onus of proof is reversed for particular reasons. That's not the normal way of doing things, you're right, 99% of the time. In almost all criminal matters and places involved in government, it is up to governments to prove that somebody's done the wrong thing, and it is a case of innocent until proven guilty. You'll be aware, of course, that ASIO is not out there doing traffic cop or beat police sort of work. They are only involved in a very small, high-level subset of crimes in terms of their jurisdiction.
Really, like organising marches?
Well, they are involved in some very serious matters. And
organising marches.
What I would tell you is I suspect very strongly, I know you said that this wasn't the case, but I suspect very strongly that some laws like that would not just be open slather, and there would be a whole lot of requirements in those laws about things that they have to satisfy themselves as to before they could go down that path. It might be that there is a preliminary amount of evidence. It might be that there is a strong suspicion. In many cases where the onus of proof is reversed like that, you're also required to go off and talk to a judge to get permission in the first instance. Now, I don't know if any of those particular examples apply, but I wouldn't be at all surprised. In fact, I would expect that the laws that you're talking about do have a list of requirements that need to be satisfied before.
Well, I'll tell you what,
used.
on your site, right, on a couple of, I'll post a link to that particular BitChute presentation, because it's not a documentary, it's a presentation.
Sure.
But they actually show their computer and what they're linking onto.
Would just be to name the law in question and go and have a look at the full statute.
From what the presentation I watched, I'd just about object to the whole fucking lot.
Well, the issue, of course, is that if you're not actually going to the laws and you're just relying on someone's interpretation or presentation on them, they might not tell the full story. They might not be inclined to tell the full story, which is why it's much better to go straight to the statute books and look at what the actual law says.
Well, the sentiment of this particular presenter is about individual freedoms.
Sure.
Now, he's saying that this bill, and he explained it relatively well, that it has the potential to fuck us all over as individuals. As soon as someone in authority points that finger and go, that's it, you're screwed. They can hold you for 28 days without charge just on a questioning warrant.
Sure. Well, I've got to balance that, obviously, against the facts in front of me, which is, I'm a member of the federal parliament. I've got a very big constituency, about 125,000 people living their lives and doing their thing, and nobody has come to me and told me about a story or a case where laws like that have been misused. So I have to balance, what the concerns that somebody's expressed via a YouTube video against, the stories that I'm hearing or not hearing from my own constituents in terms of whether there's an issue.
All right. Well, you're federal Congress. In America, you'd be equivalent to a congressman, wouldn't it?
That's
right. Now, I'll give you a first-hand account. Like, this is a state matter. That I was in Rockhampton and I was having drinks at a hotel.
Yeah.
I'd won the pool comp the night before and got a $100 drink voucher. I was enjoying it. Securities didn't like me. I left. And then, because I was sleeping in my van in their car park, they came out. Instead of letting sleeping dogs lie, they came out and said I had to leave. I said, I'm not driving a vehicle drunk. I said, I'm not going anywhere. So they called the police, and lo and behold, the police gave up a list on about 3 or 4 trumped up charges, saying that I abused them, saying that I was unruly, saying quite a number of bullshit things. Now, I had to prove my innocence, and I did. I did it by my fucking self, right? Because all I did was I went round to a few people that were there that night. I got affidavits of them. There goes the first couple of charges gone.
Yeah.
So how do we stop that sort of thing?
Are you telling me that justice was done in the end?
It cost me fucking quite a lot of money to do that in the first place, and I didn't get any money back for it.
Sure.
It would have been, again, it comes back to the fact that it would have been easier for me just to plead guilty, pay the fine, and let it go. But I decided to draw that line in the sand.
It sounds like justice has been achieved, but nobody has ever said that justice is entirely free in this country. It does take time for people's cases to be heard. That's a reality that I've never found a way to get around. If you've got the way that we can get justice done for free, Ross, let me know. Lots of legislators over history have looked in vain for those sorts of achievements.
Well, fuck, like the biggest idea I've given you is about the voting online app, where we can all get online. The Australian government's got the resources to make this happen, right? They can make an app They can make it secure to go to MyGov, all that sort of thing. Everyone, all the individuals get to go to that site. If someone's got a particular problem, like I was arrested in Rockhampton for false charges, blah, blah, blah. Someone might jump on there and say, look, go see this bloke, go see this lawyer. He'll go pro bono, or go, here's some advice.
I thought that the online platform that you've always advocated was a voting platform.
It's a voting discussion platform, right? Now, obviously, you can't just vote. You want people to have an informed opinion on their vote, don't you?
Sure.
So you go to this particular platform, you go there, you register, MyGov, you prove you're an Australian, you prove you're a citizen, you prove you're a voter, right? You go on there and you interact with everyone, like Facebook, except without the freaking ridiculous censorship crap that they got, where they got Facebook, fact checkers. Some of the fact checkers are fucking idiots, and you go there, you kick the ball around, and because it's a registered site, once we get everyone kicking the ball around, then you have a survey, then you can have a vote, then you can send it off to Parliament, where you, as politicians, forgive me for pointing the finger, where you, as politicians, know that consensus has come from registered voters, right? So that you don't piss in our ears, keep going on channels 9 and 10 and pissing in our ear about what you think is the best thing. Yous have been told directly by the public from a public format, which is registered by the public, by the government itself.
We're already told every day what our constituents think and feel.
No, who the fuck tells you? The news channels.
No. Constituents themselves, Ross. I mean,
yeah, but you're only getting a small percentage of those constituents. If you went to this site, everyone would be allowed to go on it, and they would all kick the ball around with each other to sort each other out first, and then they give you that opinion.
Are you worried that some people would spend their whole time on there and their views would dominate versus some people living very busy lives and not going on there very often?
Well, fuck, the government's got everyone so busy now, they're working 2 jobs and they've got their heads stuck up their arse. They don't know what yous are doing behind closed doors now.
You'll find compared to a few generations ago, Australians probably actually have a better standard of living and are probably working less hours for
I'm not talking about a standard of living. We've got a pretty good standard of living. Yeah. I'm talking about if it's not straight out neglect that the politicians are doing, it's a woeful discrimination of civil liberties if it's not even treasonous.
Well, if you think it's so easy, Ross, helping everybody, you should run for office, mate.
You've said that to me a dozen times.
And yet here we are. You telling me that I've got to do my job better, but being unwilling to
well,
yourself.
Are you going to investigate this actual, what do we call it, a questioning warrant?
Well, if you
because that has the potential.
Well, like I said, if you send me the name of the actual legislation, the statute itself, I bet
the statute, they'll have to have a number to go with that?
No, it's a name. It's a name of an act. So anybody criticising a law should say
the ASIO Bill 2020, Australian Intelligence Australian Securities Intelligence Organisation.
What I'm telling you is, you send me a note with the name of it, and I bet within 5 seconds we can check. And I bet you that there are requirements there that have to be satisfied before something like that can be utilised.
All right, then it comes back to the one I just remembered. In 2006, 2008, somewhere around there, we had a global downturn, right? Everyone lost 25% of their superannuation and all that sort of thing because the American company went bust and they had a big bubble bullshit. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, all them, they rigged the books and they got caught. Now, none of them went to jail. None of them went to jail. They're still in their prime position. If they're not head of the American Federal Reserve, they get promoted upwards. They ripped the American people, the global people off for millions of dollars. They got bonuses. Some of them got bonuses of hundreds of millions of dollars, and yet they get promoted upwards, and they didn't go to jail for fraud.
Well, I'm not here to answer on behalf of the American legal system.
The Australian system would be very, very similar to the American one.
That episode proves that it's not. Right? So around the world, there were huge bailouts at that time by central banks and governments. Here in Australia, because of prudential and financial reforms that were put through by Treasurer Costello in the Howard years, our financial system stayed strong through that period. Now, I might quibble on some of the details of the legislative and policy response at the time, but broadly speaking, I don't think any Aussies can deny that Australia's financial system stayed incredibly resilient and strong through that period of time when other banking systems and financial systems for other countries, really did go close to faltering.
Well, we still got to see the centralised banks is I have the issue with, because it was privatised, and it needs to be taken away from privatisation and the corporations, because you got the cesspool of the revolving door with legislators and lobbyists. Now, how many lobbyists in Australia are there per politician?
Well, we make them register these days, so there's a list of them that you can go and find online. We make lobbyists be registered, and they have to be transparent and jump through a whole lot of hoops in terms of their dealings with legislators.
Isn't Kevin Rudd now a lobbyist?
I don't know.
I'll have to find that out, because I'll give him a lot of grief on his Facebook. Actually, his Facebook page is where I get most of my barrings from.
Right.
My bannings from Facebook.
Right.
Because
well, let's leave it there, Ross. That's been a good long interview.